Happy today. I am William Brown from IamWilliamBrown.com. This is Disconnect to Connect, one word conversations. And we're having a conversation about credibility. Most of the times credibility comes up for me as as something to kind of justify with myself some of the crazy things that go through my mind. And that imposter syndrome comes up for me and all that other kind of stuff. You're not a credible person to do this. You're just this or that. So it'll be a very interesting conversation to have today. And so I invited one of my friends that I will bring up. Good morning.
Good morning.
Michelle, I forgot to tell you during our interview time that I typically ask my guests to introduce themselves however feels comfortable to them. So I would love for you to do that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. And thank you for inviting me into a conversation with you, Bill. We've known each other for years now. I want to say going on 5 or 6 years.
Right.
We've never really sat down to have a conversation about something like this before. So I think This is a great opportunity. So currently you and I know each other because I am the founder and president of a small college in Portland, Oregon called Wayfinding Academy, where one of your children attended and has graduated and now works for Wayfinding.
Right. Wow. So, it's in the bones now. It's in
the bones. So that's my current identity, and for the past 5 or so years has been as the rabble rouser in higher education, who's trying to nudge a bit of change in the way that we do college in the United States. Right. And you and I first met when I was serving as the magician on the planning team for the World Domination Summit conference here in Portland. So I've had a lot of identities, but now I mostly identify as that, a college founder and a rabble rouser.
Well, wonderful. Those are incredible titles, labels, ways of being. And just, I just love that you've, embraced that. It's like, when you're up to doing big things, there is, you really have to take on, something, and then just take on and go from there. So how does the word credibility show up for you?
Yeah, like what you said in the introduction, I also think about it a lot. I think I'm thinking about it more right now than I have in years, because I feel like, for example, with wayfinding, part of the reason why I've been able to do what I have done and successfully started a college and it's been running now for 5 years is because of the credibility that I brought with me. I had been a professor and I'd been working in higher education for 15 years. I had also been through the higher education system in a couple of different ways. So I feel like I've been able to get as far as I have because I knew that industry. I knew the information. I had studied it a lot. I had lived it. I'd practiced it. And so I had some credibility coming in. But right now I feel a lot like this kind of imposter syndrome or some sort, because maybe a lot of people feel this way, that as the leader of this organization, I'm expected currently to make decisions very outside of my knowledge zone. Right. I don't know much about, with the current global pandemic, I don't understand pandemics. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a public health professional. Right. And so I've been thinking a lot about how do you try to make those decisions, acknowledging that you don't have credibility in those fields, but you might have credibility as someone your organization should trust because you have conscientiousness and integrity and some of the other things that I think come along with credibility.
Right. It is something that, for me, credibility is something that you have or you don't, and you take, and people give to you or they don't, right?
Right.
And you have no knowledge of, until you want to do something. And it's like, oh yeah, you're not credible to do that. Right. It's like, oh, right. All right. but the one thing that I have noticed when I moved from the AV tech or an AV professional and a technology professional to a coach who I am now, and it's like, okay,
Mhm.
do I have the credibility to be a coach and not just speak to technology professionals and talk about technology, but talk about things that are important to people's lives, that are important to their business. And it's like when I look at my life, when I look at my experience, and I look at how I showed up in my work, I say, well, hell yeah. But then, people will ask me, well, how long have you been coaching, or how long have you been doing this, or what? And it's just like, dude, um, the fact that I am still here gives me
Yeah.
gives
Yeah.
me credibility. And it's so, how do you mentioned that your college experience, your experience within the higher ed kind of gave you the cred, as the kids say. I don't even know if they say that anymore, right? But
Sometimes.
right. um but it like empowered you, but now it's bringing you to a point that it won't keep you in um, your role. It has
Yeah.
to evolve and kind of move on to that.
Yeah. That's an interesting reflection because even just in my introduction of that concept, I refer to what people expect to see on paper, like, oh, she was a professor for 15 years.
Right.
So sort of like I think we all know the check boxes that people will look for when they're trying to decide whether to give us credibility or not.
Right.
And so, I mean, I think of things like our resumes or our LinkedIn profiles.
Right.
When you get to know someone, you go look at that and you kind of skim it and you say, okay, well, what makes me think that I could trust their word on this particular thing? And
Right.
in my case, it's ridiculous but true that I have a PhD. So technically, I'm Dr. Michelle Jones.
Right.
Nobody ever calls me that, ever. We
Right.
never use that title. It's never
Right.
in anything. And yet that there are certain places where if I don't have that, it doesn't make any difference what I say. So
Right.
I fill out lots of paperwork where I have to use that title and I have to use the PhD part, or
Wow.
they wouldn't even consider reading it, right? And
Right.
so I think I think there's a lot, maybe there's a difference between having credibility with strangers, which might
Right.
be what you're talking about with the coaching thing, and
Right.
having credibility with people who know you,
Right.
like personally, because I think maybe those are two different types of credibility, or how you earn it and keep it is different in those categories.
Right. It's sometimes most of the resistance that I get actually are from the people who know me, that
Huh.
they've known me in the tech world, the AV world for so long, and saw the success and everything like that, and the conversations that I was having within that, and now I'm having, I'm something else. It's like, dude, get in your lane, right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
it's almost that
Hmm.
it makes them for more comfortable with me. If I would have said, hey, I'm doing coaching only for tech professionals, only
Yeah.
talking about how you can be successful in this arena, um, the credibility would be, given, and all that other kind of stuff. And
Hmm.
it's the credibility that I get now from, my potential coaching clients, and the conversations that I have around coaching, is the language that I use now, that, okay, you sound like a coach, or
Right.
they see, or you have, you have that language. And so it's kind of interesting for me how I maneuver through that, let people know that have an understanding of me before, that, yeah, that person still exists. I still have that knowledge base. However, I believe that I've I've expanded this, and so my ex my credibility kind of goes with that. It kind of
Right.
expands with what I'm up to now. I don't know. Does it work that way?
I mean, I think it can, and it might just take time,
Right.
especially for the people who have known you for maybe they've known you for decades in one way,
Right.
and it probably won't take decades for them
Right.
to relearn you as the new identity, but it will take a little while anyway.
Right. And
I
I
think
think,
of parents,
okay,
right? Like I I know you're a parent. I am not a parent, so I
right.
speak only from the perspective of being a child of a
Right.
parent. Um, that I mean, I'm now 43, and I I mean, I think it was probably not until I was maybe 40 before my parents started seeing me as an independent adult with a knowledge base and some expertise and maybe some credibility in the work that I do, because
Wow.
they, for whatever reason, I don't know if all parents do this, some parents none, and it's just in my mind, but they think of me as how I was when I was maybe a teenager or something.
Right. Right.
And so it has taken my parents a very long time to see that, to see me as a different identity. So I don't know if it's the same thing with long-term life friends, but maybe it is. And
Right.
I guess for me, I didn't change um, industries or professions. I just changed what I did within higher education. So yeah. So I haven't thought about it that way, but that makes sense. If I were to totally go try to change industries, I would probably get the same reaction.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, what happened? No, I think that is
Right.
pretty much on my living beyond our labels conversations, and
Yeah.
with working beyond our labels. It is that, um, yes, I'm your son, you know. However, I'm
Right.
also
Right.
this, right? And I am beyond that, and too often I feel when I don't live beyond my labels and I don't allow other people to live beyond their labels, that I'm not extending that grace for their
Mm.
humanity, everything about them, everything that they're trying to do. And I think that's within the conversation of disconnect to connect. That's how we disconnect from people. It's like, this is who I am, you
Yeah.
know, accept this, or we're not going to be friends. I'm not going to call you as much, or whatever, we do to kind of let people know I'm serious, about this. And I think, when we go back to the credibility, there's something that I read when I went to Professor Google to kind of just look how, credibility shows up online, is that, credibility is something that is earned over time.
Hmm.
It is, the actions, repeated actions that you do will get people to believe that it is credible. And so it is something now that time is a factor,
Right.
and it's not just your knowledge base, it's not just your beliefs. It's now there's this time element, and in some cases, I don't believe we have control over that time period.
Yeah, that sounds right. What's interesting, no, I think that's right. I think we just have to be consistent and conscientious and have integrity and slowly build it.
Right.
But I find that the time doesn't work the same when losing credibility.
Right.
You can lose it instantly,
Instantly.
but it
Right.
takes a very long time to earn and to grow.
Right.
I think.
Right. It's the same thing about, with trust,
Yeah.
and I think if, is trust a distant cousin, or a sibling of credibility, right?
Yeah.
It's like, really, sometimes the words that kind of link together, and it's like, because you don't have this, you can't have this. We don't have an
Right.
understanding of this, because I don't trust you, you don't have credibility, right? Because one, because I don't like you, you don't have credibility, because,
Right.
it's all our linking words, or the linking things that we have, that will determine how we accept things fully. I mean, sometimes within our communication, I have seen within this pandemic, and there's this fine line between staying informed and staying, within the conversation, and not getting caught up in crazy, right? That's
Right.
that's the
Right.
only way that I can kind of explain it. And it's like, depending on the source of the information, and what I think of, the source, will determine if I think what they're saying is credible,
Hmm.
even in a dire situation. I mean,
Right.
this, these people, this organization could be telling the truth, or telling
Right.
what's closer to the truth. But I don't have a listening for it, or I don't give it much credence because of the credibility factor. And
Hmm.
it's like, and it could be, in some cases, not to be overly dramatic, it could be life or death, you know.
Right.
But really, I mean, and I think that's why it's so important with credibility. But like you said, we can lose it in a moment, but it takes time, to get it back. Um, and then in some cases, in that time period, there could be some critical things that is needed while someone is
Yeah.
trying to build back up their credibility. I don't know, how does that land?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, everything you said makes sense. And I notice that I'm experiencing the same thing when I try to, and right now because I'm making decisions on behalf of everybody who works at wayfinding and all the students at wayfinding,
Right,
and there's some responsibility there. I feel like I am erring on the side of too much news,
right,
like immersing myself in reading everything and watching the governor's press conferences, a thing I never used to do. I mean, I never
right,
used to care what the governors,
right, right,
said
right,
at press conferences.
right,
But now I watch all of them and I read the things. And so yeah, I've been noticing how I curate what, maybe I curate less what I let myself take in,
right.
but I'm very, very careful about what I share out, whether it's on
Hmm,
my personal Facebook page, or I've been doing these weekly updates for the wayfinding community
right,
where I talk about something, or I try to say, Here's our plan, here's our next step, here's critical information you should know." And almost every week I include links to things, and
right,
I extremely carefully curate those links,
right,
to try to, I guess what part of what I'm doing is trying to check myself, but also trying to mitigate what they might be experiencing on their end. Like, I don't want to share something that somebody on the other end is going to read and think, or see the link and say, "Oh, I'm not going to click this because I don't know if I trust that source."
right,
Or so I try to choose like the most neutral
right,
as I can, if I can do the CDC, for example, or
right,
the National Institute of Health, or something that it's in theory would come across as neutral, or should come across as neutral,
right.
even though I know everything seems like it's not right now.
Right.
But
It's not. There's clearly, it feels as if there are sides, right?
absolutely,
And
even in
it's
something that shouldn't have any sides, like this is
right,
not a thing that should have sides.
right.
Yeah.
And it is some. There's a saying um, that I learned when I was a kid, that it was, I don't know why it just went away from me, because another one came up, and it's like basically birds of a feather flock together. It
Uh-huh.
just came up, but that wasn't the one. It is. Oh, it was, guilty by association. You were guilty by
Right.
association, and I think I've learned it kind of the hard way, that there are some people that are up to nefarious things, or don't have credibility, try to be innocent by association, right?
Yeah.
So they find someone with credibility, and kind of link themselves to that, and kind of to make themselves credible. And so, so that came up when you were sharing about the links that you shared, because you're like, okay, I'm a credible person, right? I work hard to be credible. Right now, I believe these links are
Right.
credible. But I don't know how other people feel about, these sources
Right.
or anything like that. And so it is, how do we stay connected to people, to each other, and share, when in some cases credibility moves around so quickly for people?
Especially right now as things change so frequently and information is constantly like, it's evolving day by day by day, it seems
Right.
like. Yeah. So I think that I'm finding that in these moments, um, it is we're maybe I know I am over relying on credibility that has been built up over time, and
Mm.
I'm just transferring it to this new situation. Well, for myself, perhaps, like I'm depending on the fact that I've built up credibility with my community over time,
Right.
and so they're going to know that I'm being honest about what I know and what I don't know, and here's the limits of my knowledge, and I'm doing the best I can, and here's some information.
Right.
So sort of citing my sources
Right.
when I'm not the expert, but I notice I'm also doing it with what I take in.
Right.
I'm depending on credibility that's been built up over time, with a couple of exceptions. I mean, there are a few people who none of us ever knew their names before, but they show up, and if everybody else in their industry or they've been doing this for decades,
Right.
then we're back to like what we were talking about before with the credibility on paper. So
Right.
sort of just checking the boxes. Like, do they have these things? Okay, then I guess I'm going to trust them for this because I don't know who else to look to for information.
Right. It's I mean, and I think that's the other thing about, living beyond our labels. I don't say the downside, but so when I have a conversation about the labels, it doesn't I don't want people to feel that I am anti-labels. I'm not.
Mm,
I think labels are important for our brains. We have to identify things. It is I believe it's more about what we make those labels mean,
mhm,
what it means for, a doctor. If we make that mean more than what it is, or something, or say, oh, she has a doctorate, so what, right? Or something,
right.
or it means something. That's that's pretty much on me. Where I think that um, we get in trouble or there's a challenge is when we hold too closely to that. So I am fascinated how you can easily let go of the doctor label, because there are some doctors, because I have experience in higher ed, and there are some doctors that if you forget for a moment within the conversation, they will remind you that
Right.
you're speaking to
I know some of those too.
you're
Yeah.
speaking to a doctor, right?
Right.
And it's like, oh, okay, sorry, right? And just kind of go from there. But I recognize that the more that we're able to see where we show up authentically without those labels, then I think that's more of our humanity. Our,
Mhm.
and it's like, because I'll just say it. I see myself beyond my black label.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is that, yes, my black label, I have an experience that other people don't have, and I recognize that, and I maneuver my way through that. But there are many conversations that I have with people that I don't hold too closely to my black label. If I only had conversations like this or other conversations from my black label, I think how people would see me would be totally different, right?
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
it would be from that narrative. And so I'm not denying my black label, but I recognize that there are so many different expressions of myself and so many things that I'm curious in, that if I didn't allow myself to see myself more than just this label, not just how I see myself under that label, but how other people see me within that label, then I couldn't have a conversation. There are some people that will say to me, you're losing your credibility as a black man. It's like, no, I'm not. I'm always black, right?
Right, yeah.
Right,
You can't lose that
right.
credibility. That's
But
your lived experience.
right,
Yeah.
but there is some people that feel that if I entertain conversations, if I have a viewpoint other than that, then I'm losing it. You know,
Hmm.
you know. And so it is. Have you seen that come up for you in any way, that it's like, wait, I thought you would think this way about this, or um, you're not representing, right, as they say.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes I most of my professional lived experience as a faculty member, I taught usually in business departments. And so it was pretty common that I was the only woman
Hmm.
faculty member in that department, or one of two or something like that.
Right.
And so I think one of the things that I noticed when I shifted to doing wayfinding, which is much more of an even balance, we have a lot more diversity in the faculty and staff and uh, guides at wayfinding than I did at other places where I taught. And
Right.
so I've noticed that it's sort of released me, because it felt like when I was in the traditional college environments, I had to, I was expected to play certain roles because I was the only woman in the department, or one of two women in the department.
Right.
Um, and there was the responsibility that came along with that. And now I think I feel released from those expectations,
Right.
external expectations. But it took me a while to see myself as that's not my role anymore,
Right.
and give myself the permission to not play that role.
Right.
It still comes up periodically. There are certain meetings that I'm in, or conversations that I'm in, where I notice that I start reverting back to that because of the dynamic that's happening,
Right.
uh, and and other people's expectations. So I think the key thing that I haven't thought a lot about, and I appreciate you bringing it up, is that there's a difference between the labels that we place on ourselves and that others place on us, and knowing where those begin and end,
Right.
and really thinking about that, and making intentional choices about how to show up, and how to self-identify, and also
Right.
um, how to not let those, whether it's a self-identifying label or one someone else puts on us, how to not let those constrain us,
Right.
and make that be all that we are.
Right. It's you reminded me of another um, lived experience that I have in my college career. I took classes at an all women's school.
Oh,
Um,
I didn't know that.
and yeah, so okay, so I'll give you a little backstory here. Um, I went to St. Vincent College in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, and about 3 years before I went there, they went co-ed, because they were an all
Okay.
guys school, and then they went co-ed. If they would have still been all guys, I would, it wouldn't be a part of my story, because I wouldn't have
Mhm.
gone to an all guys school. But so I went to that school, but because in their history they were, a women's all male school, they had a partnership, or a working relationship with an all women's school that was a half an hour away, which was um, Seton Hill now University. So I was a communication theater major, so I took a lot of classes there, because all of the arts and all that other kind of stuff, that's over at the women's school, right?
Mhm.
So you kind of go there. So it's like, okay, great. So my 18-year-old mind thought it was a great thing to be in an environment where it was like 50-to-1 ratio. Um, but yeah, and until I went to lunch, and it was like, oh crap, where am I going to sit? Right.
Mhm. Right.
Um, but but I found myself often in classes, um, representing what Black people thought, because I was one of the few, what men thought about an issue. And it was just like, dude, what does Bill think about, just ask
Right.
me, or,
Right.
all that kind of stuff. And it's like there was a responsibility, but there was this weight of, now I have to respond for the label, right? Or for this idea, and I have no idea what men think about about
Right.
this.
Right.
I barely know what I think, right? About this. We didn't have a meeting, right? Type of thing, and but we but I think what I got from your sharing is that the more diverse environments that we're in kind of relieves us are kind of can relieve us of the pressures of representing the labels, and we can show up, you know, individually, and if that's, yeah, I think there's a lot of things that could happen more, but I think that the more diversity in um, the environment, and as you can tell, I'm still working through this. I think will cause that freeing, cause that, hey, I'm just Michelle, I'm just William here, and let's just kind of all be like individual human beings, just showing up and contributing to this conversation in this environment, and not the labels um, that people may be looking for.
Yeah, I agree, and it makes me think of this, when I was first starting wayfinding in the very beginning, I went on a I went to an all-day training with a local organization on how to handle, equity and inclusion in institutional environments. Wayfinding is far from being like an institutional
Fictional
environment,
environment,
like,
right?
we're yeah, we're but I still thought it was important because I was about to be, hiring all of my faculty and staff and doing all of that, and I wanted to see what best practices they suggested.
Right.
And so, one of the things that they suggested at during that training was that whenever possible, when hiring or when building a team, try to make sure that you have 3 people. Do it in threes was their advice,
Right.
um, so that no one person feels that responsibility of speaking on behalf of, in your example, speaking on behalf of all Black people or all
Right.
men or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
um, and I think so. I try to do that as much as possible. Sometimes we're better at that than others, depending on our
Right.
hiring cycles.
Right.
But one thing I noticed that's changed for us recently is, in the beginning, the founding team, we had one person who was a parent.
Hmm.
And so we very often would look to him to give us like a parent perspective, even though his kids were, toddlers.
Right.
But and I noticed that that's one of the improvements that, like, even in ways that you don't necessarily think of when you think of equity and inclusion and diversity on teams,
Right.
that and then we added like one more parent, so then there were two of them, and then one person left, and then there was one again. And
Right.
now on our team I noticed there's even in just that identity, we now have 3 people who are parents, and
Mhm.
they all have kids that are about the same age. And I've noticed how much better that feels, it seems, for them,
Right.
especially now that we're all working from home and they've got their kids in the background or doing whatever,
Right.
they don't feel like they're the sole representative of that lived experience,
Right.
and they have like comrades that they can talk to and colleagues. And as long as the rest of us who are non-parents
Right.
are respectful and let them show up as their full selves,
Right.
just like the way they would expect of us, then I think that goes well. So I think it makes me think of that. Like, if in your experience, if there had been 3 men in the classroom
Right.
or 3 Black people in the classroom, maybe there would be less pressure on
Right.
somebody to represent that whole perspective.
Right.
Although I do find that interesting how you were instantly, it didn't take time to build. You
Right.
instantly got credibility in that
Right.
moment,
Just
right?
because that's who showed up. Right.
That's right. So I do think that if when we're at our best,
Right.
we do place credibility in lived experience, as we should.
Right.
Um, and too often I think we don't.
Right.
So
It's
there's like a balance there, though.
right. It is. And I was thinking that, is credibility um, a shared endeavor? It is. I mean, there has to be a shared agreement that it's like, all right, there's like, um, I look at your resume, I look at your language, I look at the time, and we kind of like dance together and go, oh, okay. It's not just I get to decide if I'm credible or you get to decide. It is
Mhm.
something we both decide. Do I have to have a note? Do I have to feel credible before I can ask you or expect credibility from you. Does that make sense?
It does, and I don't know if it does work that way. I think in the best scenarios, it is a relationship-based
Right,
situation, um, but I don't know. I think sometimes we attribute credibility to people who don't feel that way themselves.
right,
Well, I guess I go back to your example, and I know it's maybe different because you were an 18-year-old taking a, you know,
right,
a class,
right,
but it sounded like in those moments, people were looking to you as if you were credible on a topic, and you were saying, "Whoa, whoa, wait a minute.
right,
Like, no, don't look to me for this entire explanation."
right,
So I guess I guess I don't know. I think in an ideal world, it would be a relationship and an agreement, and we all kind of share the same perspective. But in reality, I don't know that it. Sometimes we give people credibility who don't shouldn't have it, and other
right,
times we don't give it to people who should.
right. What do you think the reason? I'm trying to figure out the reason why we give credibility quickly like that.
Maybe if it's so very different from our own lived experience.
Right,
We know we're not an expert. We know we don't
right,
have credibility on that. Like I don't have any credibility of what it's like to be a black man.
right,
None. So I'll be like, "Oh no, I'm happy to give that to you right away
right,
because I don't have it." Or to somebody who's a parent. I'm not a parent, so I'm happy to give away that and
right,
trust somebody else on that. Whether I should or shouldn't, somebody might like barely be a parent or be a bad parent or not
right,
really have thought much about their role as a parent. Like
right,
they've never invested in that. So I maybe shouldn't necessarily assume just because they have that label or that
right,
like that reality that they should have credibility in that way. But
right,
maybe that's where it is if we know we don't have it, we
right,
just look to someone else who we can transfer it to.
right. It's like hot potato just came to me. It's like, okay, right?
Yeah,
It's like,
right. Maybe.
so wow. It's like,
I notice we do it sometimes at wayfinding with the students. Like our students are, I mean, they range in age from 18 to 28, so they're not all like young adults.
right,
Um, but I notice that sometimes we do that. Like when we're trying to figure out like um, how to communicate with students in a way that they will receive and digest the information and integrate it and whatever, we look to the younger members of our staff, you know, which includes TJ, and
right,
say, okay, what do we do? And that may be unrealistic because TJ might be like, I don't know, like I'm not on those platforms.
right,
I am not the person to, you know. So it could be that we, so I think it happens in those kinds of ways too, where we're just like, okay, someone's got to know more about this than I do, and we
right,
kind of do a quick scan, look around, like who might be the person who knows more about this than me,
right,
and go for that, which I think sometimes is harmful
right,
if we're asking someone to represent an entire group of people that's not fair to ask them to represent. And
right,
in other ways, it could be informative if we genuinely look to them as an expert because we know that we're not it.
right. It's the I say, because I've been in Toastmasters for a number of years, and a part of the Toastmasters training is leadership development. And I always say that that is an oxymoron because anytime you take on a role, in my experience, anytime you take on the role as a leader, there is an expectation and there is a reality created that you now know everything, even if you're in training, right? Right. Even if
Right.
you're still trying to figure it out. It's like, hey, I'm a leader and I'm learning how to be a better leader. No, you're a leader. Just, you got to get it right all the time. You got to,
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, I'm still trying to figure this out. And it's that, you don't want to lose your credibility as a leader. And I think in some cases, I think that's why leaders don't share as much as we do. We're not honest, we're not open, we're not authentic enough because we don't want to, in some cases, I'll speak for myself, give away a level of credibility
Mm,
of my leadership because it's like if they really knew that I had no idea what's going on, they probably wouldn't follow me, right? Right? Type of thing. And it is something that I recognize the more that I am willing to, not share it all, but just realize that there are some areas that I'm still figuring out.
Mhm.
Uh, that gives me more credibility, I think.
Yeah.
And it feels like, okay, you know, he's trying, he's working, he's considering the choices, and I think that's what I appreciate about you, that it's like you could just say, it's like, hey, this is what we're doing, and we'll just see how it works out. This is what,
Yeah.
but really kind of looking at your curation, looking at your sources, looking at, what other people are saying, look, people in higher ed, or other, or other people in your area, and just really um, deliberately and intentionally letting out information to your community, on a level that you feel comfortable, that that strengthens your credibility with them, and lets them know that there is a care and there is a responsibility to your leadership and to your credibility, and you're mindful of that. And so I definitely appreciate that, and I think that's a big part of the conversation around credibility, and within that, and especially when we're doing big things, starting a
Right.
college, or being a founder of a college. How many, you have to look in, the history books, the 1800s. So,
Right.
it's like founders, not too many people are walking around with founder of a college,
No.
kind of going from there.
Yeah.
Uh, but this is a conversation that I could have for hours, but we can't, right? So, is there any last thing that you want to leave everyone with, or anything about what's come up in this conversation?
No, I guess one of the things that um this brings up for me is, and we don't talk about credibility so much at wayfinding with the young adults that we're working with.
Mhm.
We do talk about integrity and authenticity and vulnerability and conscientiousness and values. We talk about a lot of trust, a lot of the things that are those adjacent concepts.
Right.
And we try to help them to understand the importance of intentionally cultivating all of those things over a long period of time and being patient with that process. But I think this makes me realize that potentially bringing credibility into that conversation could be valuable,
Mhm.
because if you're going to go out, I mean, one of my favorite things about working with this population is, gosh, young adults. They've got so much energy and enthusiasm and idealism, and they're just like, everything is possible,
Right.
And but I think balancing that, I think when they have conversations with people who are not used to working with young adults,
Right.
they are received with skepticism, because it's
Right.
like, well, okay, so you're going to go out and change, fix climate change. Well, what gives you any credibility
Right.
in that? I think is the skepticism that they're getting, that the young adults don't realize that that's what's happening.
Right.
And so I think maybe talking more intentionally with our students about that concept of what can you be doing during the 2-year program that you're at wayfinding to
Right.
slowly build credibility, as well as building a knowledge base and integrity and conscientiousness, so that when you go out to do your next steps afterwards, you have sort of this track record that maybe on paper looks okay, but also that we can vouch for as the people who've gotten to know you over the 2 years. So it makes me realize that this is probably a thing that would be helpful for young people to start thinking about really intentionally,
Right.
and because it really does take a long time to build.
Right. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. I have the website going, and people can
Oh
connect
yeah.
with you there. I mean, as a parent of a graduate, and a crew member,
Right.
I am just so um, excited, biggest fan and,
Mm.
supporter of what you're doing. I think that there is a conversation around, education that you're having, that the more people that are within that conversation, I think, um, education will change, for a lot of people. And I think in some cases, um, just my opinion, there's a lot of conversations around higher education and education in general that people just stopped having.
Yeah.
Um, and it's created debt, it's created confusion, it's created, loss of passion in our learning. And you're I'm gonna say knee deep in that and seeing that it is possible, to really be successful in that and help people find their way. Um,
Yeah.
and and that's what life is all about. And so, thank you very much. I I would love for you to stick around in the green room for a couple of moments while I end the show, and I'm sure I will talk to you soon.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you, Bill.
Okay. Wow, that was a great conversation. There's a lot of places that, I didn't think it would go, but I think really that's the what I think this conversation is all about, is to see how words are showing up for us, and how they're playing out in our lives. What I will ask you to do is, within the comments after watching this conversation, just let me know how, credibility is showing up in your life, and just see what you, got from this conversation, that, maybe you can have some other conversations with the people around you, on. The world wants you, the world needs you, and the world is waiting for you. So go be you. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you tomorrow on One Word Conversations.